Right Honorable Kim Campbell. She was following the election closely and advocating strongly for Hillary Clinton. And Ms. Campbell is my guest from near Paris this morning. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
I had fully expected to be talking to you about the significance of the first female United States president. Not to be. What is your reaction overall to what happened?
Well, I'm very disappointed, obviously. I think it would have been an extraordinary step forward. I think Hillary Clinton would have done an admirable job. But I think what disturbs me more is the nature of her defeat. That I think Donald Trump is not someone who is going to be a positive advocate for women. He has some very retrograde views, and I think that's really worrisome to me. But I also watched the playing out of this campaign, going back to the primaries, and I saw a lot of the themes of the double standards, et cetera, that women face, and also the unleashing of misogynist rhetoric that I haven't seen in the public realm for decades. So I feel that that we're really farther behind, and this is not a fault of Hillary Clinton. It's the circumstances under which this election has unfolded with a candidate who has given people permission to say things and express sentiments that are really, really counterproductive to women and women's interests.
Allowing to give voice in that way. I mean, what is your concern for the future, just as far as the political discourse toward women, toward sexism, toward misogyny? What is your concern?
Well, if you look at the last few administrations, and not just the Obama administration, but also George W. Bush with his, very, talented and intelligent wife, and daughters who occasionally got themselves into a pickle. But there's been a kind of a model of families in the White House where the wives have been. I mean, being first lady is a very difficult job. I don't think anybody asks for it or welcomes it particularly, because it is, it's very demanding and you're under a spotlight. But I think recently, from Hillary Clinton to Laura Bush to Michelle Obama, intelligent women have taken it on and tried to make something meaningful out of it and tried to be an example of values that young men and women could admire and emulate. And now we're going to have something that's really very different. And I worry about that for
in
the
White
social
House
impact.
and with the First Lady, Melania, you're speaking of there. We don't know what that's going to look like in the Donald Trump family in the White House. Can I ask you, I'm interested, all the polls leading up to the vote yesterday, they indicated that there was a willingness on the part of American voters to elect a woman. But half of the voters, half of the respondents in those polls said they just didn't want that woman to be Hillary Clinton. So do you see in her defeat a repudiation of women as president or as Hillary Clinton personally?
Well, there's two ways of looking at it. One, you could say personally it was her. And that's why, when you're the person, it's very difficult to parse out all the other things. I mean, I got into the research on social and cognitive psychology about gender barriers after I was out of office. But I could never interpret my own campaign entirely, because people are entitled not to like you. They're entitled to differ with you on your partisan positions. But I think there's also this sense of people not wanting to acknowledge that they're not comfortable with a woman there. So they find all sorts of excuses that enable them to say, well, not that woman, or I don't like this, instead of actually saying, look, she doesn't look or sound like anybody else who's ever done that job, and that makes me uncomfortable, which is actually quite a normal human thing. And one of the things that was going for her was that she'd been in the public eye for so long that we'd become habituated to her. In the same way, you look at Angela Merkel in Germany. We don't really sort of think of her as being the female chancellor of Germany because we're so used to her now, but that our thinking about her kind of transcends her sex. Mm-hmm. So I had hoped that would have helped Hillary. But I think it looks like she may well have won the popular vote, yes. Which means that certainly there were a lot of people who were prepared to support her. But I think the campaign, part of the way sexism works is that you never get the benefit of the doubt. People are always looking for ways to validate not wanting you there. And this notion that she was crooked or that she was, you say, well, what are the crimes that she supposedly committed? And nobody can tell you. The Benghazi, well, the Republican House Committee held hearings with the explicit purpose of discrediting her. They said that it was totally political. After all of their hearings, after she testified for 11 hours, the chairman said, we could find no evidence of wrongdoing by Secretary Clinton. Now, if anybody was going to find it, they were going to find it. But it seemed to make no difference.
Now, the
So it's this
perception is such. The perception of
yes,
her
that,
lingers through the emails and continuing to
yeah.
build on that. Can I ask the message of this? There were so many women in the United States who had said prior to the vote, I can't wait to live in a country where my daughter can see they can grow up to become the president. So that hasn't happened. Conversely, they saw a nasty, horrific, bitter, personal campaign. What is the message to young girls? What is the message to other women who might be thinking about running for office in the future?
Well, I worry that it will discourage people, that young women and those who support them. But there were also some interesting breakthroughs. There are now 4 women of color in the U.S. Senate, so talking about broadening that scope. There are some dynamic women in other levels of government. But I've often said that in order to change the landscape from which people derive their sense of how the world works and populate it with hitherto unrepresented people like women, there's going to be a few human sacrifices on the way. And in my own life, it's amazing how many people like to say, oh, well, she was only prime minister for 5 minutes. Well, no. And actually, I was prime minister twice as long as John Turner, 4 times as long as Sir Charles Tupper. And no, I didn't get a chance to win a mandate in an election. But there's only ever one prime minister. And I did the job. And in the summer of 1993, Gallup said I had the highest approval rating for a prime minister in 30 years. Right. So I don't disappear because people need to know that happened. People need to build on that a woman can do that job. And if you see women who have done those jobs, it becomes more familiar, more acceptable. And those visceral attitudes that say, oh, she doesn't belong there, gradually disappear. So we just have to keep doing things. We have to make women visible. In Canada, we've had a number of women premiers at the provincial level. That changes our view of who gets to do that job. So it's deeply disappointing. But I would not say give up because it is too important. And Donald Trump may, in fact, crystallize the consciousness of women over the next few years about the need to have a powerful voice of respect and celebration of women's capacities rather than the kind of values that he articulates.